All right. Welcome, everyone, to WNBA San Francisco. And we're here today for a wonderful program. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about our chapter, and then I'm going to introduce the program today. So we are WNBA San Francisco, and we are part of a national organization that was founded in 1917 by women who were left out of the publishing industry. They couldn't write books, they couldn't sell books, they couldn't be librarians. So a band of women founded WNBA in New York to get their books published, to write books, to sell books. There were booksellers. And so we're over 100 years old. We're also a United Nations non-governmental organization. So we do a lot of charity work. We are not a big, well-endowed, we don't have big donors. We do everything I say. We do it ourselves. We're like Rosie the Riveter. So if you're a member, it behooves you to just get involved because, we don't hold your hand. Sometimes we don't return emails. Sometimes we don't even let you into the Zoom room on time. We're just doing it from our living rooms right now. We've been doing it from different places throughout the Bay Area because we started in San Francisco. We were founded, our chapter, there are 12 chapters throughout the United States. And if anyone wants to drop in the chat, if you know our WNBA San Francisco website, I would love that. Otherwise, I will drop it in the chat later. But we were founded in 1967 by Effie Lee Morris, who was a pioneering Black librarian. She used to live in New York, so she was in the New York chapter. She moved out here in 1967 and founded our chapter. And I think our chapter we are really the most active chapter. We have everything from last night, we had a poetry reading. Today we're having can someone shout out the title of today's program because I don't have it at my fingertips.
Women Writing True Crime.
Thank you. Women Writing True Crime. So we have a wide variety of programming. Also on April 30th, if you are a writer or you know someone who is writing a book, we are having a pitch-o-rama and it's selling out. It will sell out. We really literally have probably less than 10, but we might over enroll a little bit because sometimes people don't make the true event. And it's a pitching event called Pitch-O-Rama, and you pitch to agents, publishers, fiction, nonfiction, true crime, all kinds of things. It's a really fun event. You don't have to have your manuscript all prepared. In fact, it's better, especially for nonfiction. If you're writing true crime, it's good to have a version, but an editor is going to probably make you change it anyway. So I know we're going to hear a lot today from our distinguished panelists. I just want to say something. I'm the president, and I want to just say I'm not really a true crime connoisseur, but I want to say I do have a little bit of background because my mom is a retired judge. And I was telling the panelists today that my mom's been having some health issues recently, and she's having a little trouble walking, but I'm her caregiver. And she's a judge, and she retired quite some time ago. But when I was growing up, I heard a lot of stories about crime, as you can imagine. She was a pioneering judge. There was literally a handful of women judges, probably in California, in the United States. So we had I'll say, criminals calling our house. She was really friendly with everyone. They like to come and talk to her after and get counsel from her. And literally she would give out her number. So I remember there was people calling from mental hospitals and yeah. So also she's a true crime. And by the way, everyone's unmuted. So please mute yourself when you come in. And we had a lot of true crime books in our house. And my mom's an eccentric person. And I was always like, she's got all these books. And a lot of them were about family members murdering other family members. So I was always a little wary. I was like, is this a good thing? My mom was not like the other moms in my town, at least, because I grew up in a kind of suburban environment, and back in the 70s, 80s, other moms were not working in our neighborhood. They were giving their kids milk and cookies. I got a lot of stories about true crime. So I'm going to hand it over to Mitzi and you guys can take over from there.
Hi, well, I'm Mitzi Szereto, and I actually wanted to say that's funny what you were saying about people phoning up from all over and criminals calling, because when I first started in true crime, a friend of mine who's a retired police lieutenant was a bit concerned, thinking, oh, I'm going to like start getting weird mail and emails and all kinds of things happening. And I'm like, well, no, thank God nothing's happened so far. So, and I don't give out my phone number.
Yeah. And I think it makes you more trusting because you realize I don't know, my mom is very intuitive and trusts. She's got a lot of trust, which is good. And there's a lot of fear out there. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, as I said, I'm Mitzi Szereto, and I'm joined today by two of my contributors from my new book release, The Best New True Crime Stories, Partners in Crime. And we have Cathy Pickens and Joan Renner. Hello, Joan and Cathy. I'm really pleased to have you both in the book, and you will be in future books as well. So we'll talk. We will kind of drop those hints for everyone listening and watching. So I think the first thing we wanted to talk about in our subject today is about obviously true crime, but what about writing it makes it different from other genres? I'll kind of throw in my 2 cents worth. I sort of approach this. I mean, it's nonfiction. I mean, and at least it should be, because I mean, if you're, this is the thing about true crime, is sometimes it has a bit of a bad rap that perhaps things are being created that aren't really supposed to be in the story. And that's really not what it should be, but it was in the past in many ways. But as far as how it's really different from other genres, I think we have to keep in mind that we want to engage the reader, and we're dealing with nonfiction. And if nonfiction could be somewhat dry, as journalism would be as well. It's, you read it, it's basically you're reading a bunch of facts. So it's a really good juggling act about how you can make it engaging to the reader, as if it were a piece of fiction that you're drawing in your reader, but you're not feeding them a bunch of false information or created or invented information. And I think that's one thing that makes it's sort of a combination of everything, and yet it has to stand on its own, because we have to always remember that it is nonfiction. Now, would any of Joan or Cathy, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, or your interpretation of it?
Well, yeah, I think for me, a friend and I were talking about it once, and the idea is with that kind of stories, it's sort of like when you're telling one of the true crime stories, you do it like you're talking to a neighbor over the back fence, so you include things about the people involved, their personalities. So it's not just a recitation of facts, it's something more than that. You can see the people in there, you can see the victims in there, you can see the suspects and the perpetrators in there as well. So it's that kind of feel. It's like, how would you tell that story? How would you approach it if you were just standing at the back fence telling your friend you heard this story about a murder? What would you say? And how would you explain it? And that really, I always try to keep that in mind when I'm approaching something. How would I explain it if I was just chatting with a friend?
I like that back fence comparison. I started my writing life. I started my work life as a trial attorney, and then I started my writing life in mystery fiction. So that for me, a good true crime should, as you say, have all that peripheral stuff. I want to know about the people. I'm really very, very curious about how they got here and what prompted this and what might have prevented it. And I have a really close friend who is a journalist, Columbia School of Journalism trained journalist with a great repertoire. And he was going over something for me that I had written, and he wanted to rearrange it, and he wanted it to be in chronological order. And I said, but that's not interesting. That's not the way the story unfolds. And really, there were about 3 different chronologies, which is how I ended up breaking it up. And so there is a very different take on how we tell stories, if it's an encyclopedia entry or if it's a newspaper article, or if we have all the facts, which is true crime writers, that's really ideally where we'd like to be. or if the story is just unfolding. So I do think that those elements of suspense and curiosity and character development that we find in good fiction is also what makes good true crime.
Exactly. And also what's fun about, for instance, doing these anthologies is having so many different writers in the book, and each person writes in their own way and tells the story in their own way. And I think that when people ask me, well, how do I write a true crime story? It's like, well, there is no set way to write a true crime story. I mean, if you're a writer, if someone said, how can I write a fiction novel? Well, I mean, we've got many writers out there, and everyone tells a story in a different way, and that's what's interesting and exciting about doing it, is that we're not all speaking in the same voice and just doing everything the same way. That would be boring, and what's the point?
Exactly.
Yeah. As far as we're true crime's like sort of the hot thing right now, and as I'm sure we've all known and heard and read tons of articles that this is sort of the big thing with women. Women just seem to really love true crime, and they really gravitate toward true crime. And there's like, I was just going online, doing a bit of searching before we went live. And I mean, I found this like long scholarly article analyzing what the reasons are. And it's a fascinating subject. And people are really wondering why women are so drawn toward true crime. And is there really like one reason? A lot of people have said, well, women, being overwhelmingly the victims of crime, unfortunately, can identify with these stories and perhaps look upon these stories as cautionary tales. And I suppose, to some degree that's true, but I think even myself, when I'm consuming true crime, whether if I'm reading it or I'm watching a series on television, I'm not really, if I'm thinking that, it certainly isn't conscious. But Cathy and Joan, what's your take on why true crime is so appealing to women?
The mystery fiction market is also predominantly female consumers. I think part of it is the puzzle. It is the intellectual puzzle of solving what happened, just as it is with fiction. I do think there's an element of sort of protection. If I can figure this out, if I can see what mistakes somebody else made, maybe I can protect myself and people that I love. But I think also for an awful lot of us, and this would be me included, I came to true crime first, again, as a mystery fiction writer, because I wanted to get the details right. But what I found was much more complex storytelling. And the best of it involves these domestic situations. I'm not one for dwelling in the mind of a deranged serial killer. That does not interest me as much. But the lives of their victims, or the lives of other people that find themselves enmeshed in crime. And what I've learned, because I've worked in prisons and I've worked with a lot of guys who are now writing their own books, I have gotten odd letters and emails. It really came alive for me that there's more than one side in these stories. And it's so much richer than most of what's produced as fiction, quite frankly. If you find it really well done, we are getting to try out this world. And for readers, there's a lot of research, you probably came across that too when you were looking this up recently, on the neuroscience of reading. And the more complex the story, the more we get to try out the emotions involved in it. And it's how we practice. It's why we watch horror movies and get scared, or we watch love stories and get that sensation. It's a neural rehearsal for real life. And so I think that somebody says, oh, it's just gore porn. That's what a male friend of mine calls it. There she is watching her gore porn. I think it's much more sophisticated and complicated than that. And I think that appeals to women who tend to live these very sort of domestic, complicated, relationship-bound lives.
Joan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, for me, sometimes it's just catharsis. I like to see somebody get the bad guy, you know? I
Yes.
really, really like that. If there's a bad guy out there, get him. Because I know, like, my dreams, ever since I was a kid, I'm really pretty much of a wuss, frankly. And my fallback position is act crazy. That's
Okay.
that's my fallback. A friend of mine gave me a taser yesterday, so I was going to go out and tase people downtown, but I thought better of it. But
I'm glad
it,
you're here instead of in jail. That's good.
yeah, it would have been embarrassing. Although I am curious to see how it works. But yeah, I like that feeling of, yeah, get that bad guy. But there's also, again, the instruction, like, you know, could I be that person? Could I be the person
Mhm,
committing the crime?
mhm.
Could I be the victim of the crime? You know, and it's to me, it's getting to know the people. The people on all sides of it are interesting
Absolutely.
to me. They're
Yeah.
interesting to me. How did they? And that, I think, is more of a female trait, if there is such a thing. Is like, we want to know. We want to get inside people's heads and find out what makes them tick. What makes how did that guy end up, or how did that woman end up doing what they did? And sometimes there is no, the most interesting and yet frustrating cases are the ones where there's no clear line from how that person started out their life to how they ended up. And those
Absolutely.
are, to me, are just like fascinating. And I'm not a particularly religious person, or anything. So, but for me, it's sort of like, there I then absolutely believe in evil. I
Mhm.
think that evil exists, and that, for me, it's the only explanation of how did someone come from a relatively, as far as we know, like the dating game killer, for instance,
Mhm.
Rodney Alcala. His life was fairly
Yeah.
normal. He has siblings. They seem to come out all right, and yet he did not. He started killing at about the age when serial killers really become active, in 25, 26, and he was a monster. And he died last year, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But it's just, how did he why him and not his siblings? Why him and not the next door neighbor? Why him? I don't have an answer for that. And I think that's something I'll never be able to answer, except that some people are just simply evil.
But we do look for that explanation, because I was interviewed by somebody recently, and they kept wanting me to talk about this guy, and the bad upbringing he had. He grew up in a poor situation in the South. And I'm like, I know lots of kids who grew up in poor situations in the South. They're not
Yep.
serial killers. He made choices. He wanted to get what he wanted, and he wanted the easy way, and he made choices. So I think that within all of us, we have the capacity for evil. And there are those people who make the choice. And then you take a few steps down that path. And I don't know that there's always a turning around point. But then I've met plenty of other people who've committed murders, um, who are really decent people. I mean, they've got good hearts, and this was their one mess up, and it
Mm.
was huge. So we've got this continuum here between Rodney Alcala and these people who make the choice to go down that
Yeah.
path, and these people who have this one really stupid, tragic, irrevocable mistake that they make, and everything in between.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was curious. Go ahead, Mitzi.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I think in reading true crime, when you're reading stories about getting some understanding about how this person got from A to B to C, and there is perhaps some underlying reasons they turned into this baddie, so to speak, it's more satisfying. But when you read something, and I'm currently writing a story about someone who is over the top monster, and there is no reason for it, and this guy's crimes are so heinous that people are probably going to freak out when they actually read the story in an upcoming book. But there is
I am
no
not going to
reason.
read that. I'm not going
Yeah.
to read that.
I'll
It's in
definitely read
their
it.
famous and infamous book. So I've literally fallen into this deep rabbit hole because I keep finding more stuff out. But there
Oh my
is no
gosh.
reason for this. And then that is the most disturbing of all, when you cannot find any understanding or any way to say, I could kind of get what made him turn. And there is no what made him
Yeah.
turn. And that's horrifying.
And well, it's unsettling too, because then how do you identify these people when they're walking around?
Yeah.
Their heads aren't spinning around, their eyes aren't twirling around in their head. How do you identify these people? And where I was going with my dream comment earlier is that really I am a wuss, but in my dreams, I'm a total badass. I mean, if someone's in trouble or I'm there. I'm beating people up. I'm, saving people. I don't know what that's all about. But so part of my love of true crime is like when those detectives get out there and they're solving that crime, I'm right there in lockstep with them. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's get this guy. We know let's get him. And for me, that's really a powerful feeling. It's like, yeah. You can't control this world, but you can have some impact or input on how things turn out for you or the people around you.
Well, why do you think there's so many women that are writing true crime as well? Because I mean, as far as we're consuming it, but obviously there's a lot of women and they're quite prolific at this. And I kind of think Anne Rule really kind of broke open that egg, so to speak, and put women on the map as far as writing true crime. But why are we actually drawn to it? I mean, personally speaking, I came from a journalism background, and I actually kind of got into this by accident. And that's generally what happens to me is I start doing something totally randomly by accident, and then I just get stuck into it. But I mean, what is it about it that women writers are so into it?
I love history. And I think that you can tell a lot about, I think Robert Kennedy made a statement, something to that, people get like a town or the nation get the crimes they deserve. I think you can find out a lot about what history is from the kinds of crimes, because I think of it, I do mostly historic crime, mostly just 20th century. So, that's it. That's where I am. But it seems like there's not a clear demarcation, but you can almost tell what's going on socially, economically, and everything else by the kinds of crimes that are committed. You look in the 1920s, there's a lot of crimes attached to bootlegging, of course, and all that. And then you get into the 30s, and when you get into the Depression, there's a lot of kidnapping for money, because the separation between rich and poor is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, kind of like today, so look out. But I mean, it's just growing, this vast chasm of things. And into the 40s, and it's you get into the war, and you have, like in LA, it was very specific in some respects because Los Angeles was such a hub for wartime activity. Lots of soldiers and sailors going in and out, a lot of transient, people coming in for war work. So there's been a lot of studies about people who, when they, especially earlier in the 20th century, when they left their hometown and they didn't feel those eyes on them, when no one was going to tell, Uncle Bob or tell your mom what you were up to, you could get up to some pretty wacky stuff. And so the whole history of it, but it's because it's social, it's economic, it's all of these things, it's popular culture, all these things roll up into this wonderful fabric of true crime, and you can sort of tell where a person is in history from the kinds of crime they choose to commit. I mean, it's not a slam dunk, but it suggests certain things.
It is a good window. It's funny you talk about that because you're talking about this big sweep of things, and I've been working on this series of books on regional true crime, and I'm in the Carolinas. I grew up in the hill country in South Carolina, and so I wrote about Eastern North Carolina. I'd never really been to the Outer Banks. You can get there faster from Delaware than you can from Charlotte. So, but there are things that happen there that couldn't happen where I grew up, closer to the Western North Carolina mountains. I mean, there's also this, we study foodways and we study folkways and we study all these things about people culturally. But I do think crime is also a big defining factor. There are things that would happen in one place that couldn't possibly happen in another place or at another time. So why does that interest women in particular? You're talking about Anne Rule, and I always think of my gateway drug as Edna Buchanan, who is the Pulitzer Prize winning Miami Herald journalist. I never met her, but I've always seen these pictures. She had this magnificent mane of hair and these big eyes, and she looked very tiny. And you could just tell she wanted to know the whole story about something. Now, she's very much on the side of law and order. And so she really does, Joan, she's in there with you. She's wanting to make all this right. But she also understood there are other sides to the story. And I think that's part of it. Now, we have here in Charlotte a guy, Michael Gordon, who is writing the crime stuff. He really would, I think, maybe rather be a sports writer, but he writes that. He really digs into the story. So I won't say that's a purely female trait. But I do think that sometimes women can get people to tell the stories. But you ask why women are drawn to it. As a mystery writer, I was completely upended when I went to work. I was a volunteer in the local jail, teaching guys how to start their own businesses. And I sat there, and even though they were all dressed in orange, other than that, they could have been in my class of MBA students paying $30,000, $35,000 for an MBA. I mean, what's the difference? Maybe a few more tattoos, but they all backgrounds, all everything, and they are the heroes of their stories. We all are. And so to me also, that's fascinating. Now, I don't think that everybody that walked into that room had that same take on what they saw, but all of a sudden writing mystery fiction, while I still love to read it and I still love to write it, I realized that it wasn't a game, that this was not just some, body on the library rug, but this was real life, and there were people on all sides of it that were affected. I've met the mamas of the victims and the mamas of the guys who did the killing. And that changed things for me. And that's not why all people come to true crime, but I do think that, as I said before, women tend to be very engaged and invested in these complex stories of people's lives.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I've gotten weird emails and stuff too. I was emailed by it was twin brothers. I was on a TV show, interviewed about them, and I also wrote about them. Twin brothers who committed rapes in the South Bay area of Los Angeles in the 1990s, I think. And they were, I think, two of the first people tried and convicted on rohypnol, the date rape drug. And they're not geniuses, of course, because they videotaped the crimes, and that was a lot of evidence against them. But I'd written about them, and I got an email from, for a while I couldn't find them. They should have been on the sex offender registry. They weren't. I wondered where they were. One was in prison, one was out. And I found out that they had emigrated from Romania via Canada or Greece and Canada, and ended up in Hollywood area in the US. And they had become Canadian citizens along the way. So when California kicked them loose, they just deported them. And so when I finally found out where they were, and I got this email, and the person writing the email said, "Oh, you're so wrong about these brothers. They're really, I've known them their whole lives. They're really, decent guys." And some of the witnesses recanted their testimony, which is absolutely not true, because I've heard from some of the people who testified as well. And yada yada yada. And I wrote back and I said, "I don't know which one of the brothers you are, but I know for a fact that no one would have anything that nice to say about the other than one of you, and if you ever grow a pair, feel free to email me again." And, crickets, right? But I traced the email back to where they were supposed to be living in Canada. So okay. I know that's where it was from. So, but I mean, really? Nobody would have anything nice to say about these guys. They're monsters. And I knew they'd reoffend, and apparently they haven't committed any other sexual crimes, but they have committed crimes like defrauding women from, money, that kind of thing. It's still, they're primary victims still women. They still hate women. It's obvious, and they still victimize women, not in the same way. That's the only difference. But they're still, they didn't age out of it until fairly recently. I don't think they'd be committing sex crimes now. But
wow.
I sure hope I don't get a letter from the guy I'm writing about. Well, he's banged up in a maximum security prison in the UK, but he's got parole or something.
If they have internet, well, and that's the thing.
He had a phone. He was kind of,
like I said, I'm a wuss, so I'm really brave behind my email. I'm like, yeah, bring it, But face to face.
Now she has a taser, so I don't know.
Now everyone is tased in my life. Everyone's going to be tased. No, but I am such a. I'd be curled up in a fetal position, whimpering, if someone actually came after me. But I'm offended by the arrogance of that email and the lies contained in it. And I just thought, oh no, you don't. I
put my money that you are not curled up. Lord forbid that it should happen, but I do not. I think you've been doing enough for her, thing. You're ready.
No. Think of me as curled up in that field, whimpering.
Oh no, you're ready. You're ready.
No, I'm the queen of wusses. But I can put on a good show. I'm like like in nature, sometimes animals make themselves really big and stuff, if they're birds, their feathers come up and stuff. That's how I think of myself. I make myself really big, but inside I'm quaking with fear.
There's all that neurobiological rehearsal though. I've known you.
I don't know. I don't know. I hope you're right. I hope it never comes to that.
I hope we never have to test that out.
Yeah, that's the best scenario. But I do have my taser just in case, and I'm ready to take them down. Take them down. You can only do it for a couple of seconds. If you do it for 5 seconds or more, they could.
Yeah, that could be bad.
That could be really bad. So I'm practicing timing myself.
Yeah, so you don't want to start your prison ministry from the inside.
No, I really do not. I really do not. I just want them to hurt, and get down. That's all I want.
Not getting on her wrong side, Mitzi. I'm just telling you
that. I'm pretty gentle.
Joan's going to have this bumper sticker on her car, taser on board.
Yeah. I don't want to invite that kind of attention. No, but yeah, I don't want to feel I don't want it to embolden me. Okay.
Oh dear.
What do you got? I got my taser.
Just to sort of backtrack a minute, because when Cathy was making some points about, when you're writing this stuff, and I think that's something really important to always remember when we're writing true crime, is that these are real people we're talking about. So we're kind of that's always something to bear in mind, when we're crafting our stories and just talking about these lives of people, and that goes on both sides of the fence, whether they're the victims or the perpetrators. These are real people, and it's sort of that balancing act about when we're writing about these stories, being fair. I think fairness is something that perhaps maybe that's something women gravitate toward more when they're writing true crime, as opposed to the old-fashioned true crime that was generally the domain of men, that kind of exploitive stuff. But would you say that's probably maybe we're better at that, or are we being sexist saying that?
I'm gonna have to say you're being sexist. I'm thinking of some guys who handle that really, really well. Skip Hollandsworth in Texas, is another one of my absolute favorites. He's the one who did the story about Bernie Tiede, the mortician, who Jack Black played him in the movie called Bernie, where the whole town kind of rallied around him after he shot this woman dead. So I think that there are some guys who do this really well too.
Well, I have lots of men in my books. I mean, I have a lot of male contributors, but and it's interesting because I think they're very intuitive and they're very sympathetic. There's one gentleman in particular. I mean, you could almost kind of feel his heart in the stories, And,
Yeah. And that's probably the key word there is intuitive, that you care about the people on all the sides, and it's not exploitive. That really is something that concerns me, and I try to be very cautious about it when I'm choosing a story to write about, or because I'm always going to open up something bad for somebody somewhere. It's only the older stories I've written about when everybody's long gone that you feel a little bit safe about it. And I've actually just finished writing one that it's been a horrible unsolved murder of an entire family in Western North Carolina, and it's 50 years old, and it was just solved.
DNA?
No.
Really?
The Confession of a Guy in the Dixie Mafia.
Oh,
If
whoa.
you can believe him. Yeah. In Georgia. Yeah. I mean, it's just out of the blue, and so even those old stories they still have people involved, on one side or the other. Yeah.
Well,
I always try to be careful. Yeah, because I mean, I've been blogging. I've been doing a true crime blog now for about what, I don't know, 10 years, 12 years, something like that. And I always try to be really, that's the way I can give back. I've heard from a lot of people on both sides, like, well, of course, the idiot brothers from Canada, they don't count, but from victims, or from a guy. The oldest one I ever heard was a guy whose great great uncle or something was executed at San Quentin for murdering his pregnant girlfriend back in the 20s. And it's always, all these things have ripples. Everyone always talks about it, and it's true. I mean, it's like you have, like it's a fabric and somebody pokes a hole in it. Well, it's never the same. There's always that missing person in a photograph. There's always that blank space that's going to be there. So I try to be sensitive to that. And that's why whenever I've had some pretty gut-wrenching emails from victims of crime. Sometimes it's something I've written about, not the specific thing, but like child sex trafficking or something. I heard from a woman who'd been trafficked as a child.
Wow.
And those things are gut-wrenching. But if I can be an open ear, if I can provide any kind of guidance, I'm certainly not a shrink. I'm not qualified anywhere near that, but I know people. I know how to find help. I know how to to find help, get help available for someone. Because I heard from someone fairly recently who didn't know until she read my blog that her half sister was the first victim of a serial child killer in the 1950s.
Wow.
And wow, I mean, she asked if she could call me and talk to me, and I said, of course, I would do anything. Because at first she didn't want to believe it, because that's not the story she'd been told, her whole life. And that's what families used to do. They can't do it so easily now, but they used to sort of, it's not fit for the kids, or we just want to spare them the pain. And so they would fill in the blanks with something that wasn't true. She thought this sister had died of diphtheria, right? And her grandparents even went so far as to get a false death certificate and burial place, which was nothing even close to where the girl is. And so she said, can I call you? And I said, of course, anything. And she put me on speaker. Well, the first thing when she emailed me, the first thing I asked her was, make sure you're not alone. Are you alone? Are you married? Do you have a companion? I mean, this is huge. You can't be by yourself for this. And she said, no, I've got a great golden retriever. and my husband's here, is very supportive. And I said, good, because this is not the kind of news that you can just take on all by yourself without some support. And we had a very good conversation on the phone. She put me on speaker. Her husband was there supporting her. She asked me a million questions. I sent her everything I had so she could verify the information that I gave her. And her husband at the end said, during this conversation, I've watched a weight literally lift off of her shoulders, because now she knows, she always had a feeling something was wrong, but she didn't know what it was. And, you know, the truth shall set you free kind of thing. But it was like, he said she looked 10 years younger
Oh,
because of
gosh.
that. And I said, that's why I do what I do, is just for those moments when I can actually give back. I never want to exploit anyone, their pain, the family's pain. That's not what I want to do. And I'm sure the rest of us who write true crime feel that same way about it.
Mm. Wow,
Yeah,
what a story.
exactly. I mean, when I'm writing my stories, I'm always thinking that because I don't really do historical stuff like Joan, which, you know, sometimes it's safer when everyone's long gone.
They're long, mostly
They're
long hair, but
gone.
it still comes back to bite
You'd
in the
think,
butt.
yeah, you'd
Yeah,
think.
but it's always thinking about who might possibly find out about this story or read it, you know, a family member, whatever. I mean, I did a piece about a guy who was a gentleman robber. And I mean, I know that he's got family alive. And I was just really conscious of the fact that I did not want to cause them any harm or pain in reading this. And I tried to be, I think I rendered the story in a really sympathetic way as well, because it was a really sad, unfortunate thing that made this man turn to crime. But yeah, I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, if this story is read by someone else, I don't want them to feel that I've been a vampire sucking their blood, you know, and you know, so that's, I think that's something we always got to remember. These are real people. These are not characters in a fiction book. And as I said, whether it's the perpetrator or it's the criminal, you know, to always be aware of that. And you know, that's the one big difference when we're dealing with true crime.
Yeah, I have very little empathy, to be honest, for a lot of the criminals I've written about, just because it's difficult to feel that for them. Some of them I have a great deal of empathy for, because I can see how they ended up where they did. And it's a tragedy. It's always a tragedy all the way around. The person who commits the crime, his family suffers or her family suffers, you know, and so it's always a tragedy for everyone. But sometimes it's difficult for me to feel any real empathy for some of these people who commit some of the more heinous crimes. I understand the ones in a domestic setting to some extent better. Those people are less likely, and as an attorney, you can probably tell me if I'm right, Cathy, or not. I think people in that setting are less likely to reoffend. It's like you were talking about that one time they made that one big mistake, you know, and I think that, but when you have people who commit a series of crimes, whether it's homicides or anything else, these are people who found a taste for it for whatever reason.
Yeah. And I would separate out those, like I said, who made those choices and set on that path and there's no turning back. But I was sitting in on some hearings in the South Carolina Senate a couple or 3 years ago. The Pew Research Foundation had done a study on offenders, murder in particular. And there is this really sharp, steep curve from late teens until the age of 22. And then it just goes straight down. That we don't find people 27 years old committing crimes at the same rate we find 21-year-olds. So guess what? The brain's judgment functions in males are not fully formed until the age of 23 or 24 years old. And so what you have is these just emotional firestorms because the emotion and those sorts of things are fully formed. So we're also tracking their neural development up to this peak, and then it just drops off. And so I do think that while it may be difficult to get to feel much empathy all the time, we also have these I call it young and dumb. It's guilty of being young and dumb. And so I do think that we're doing the right thing as a nation and now looking at the sentences we give, particularly in teenage years. The crimes are still horrible, but you know, these aren't fully formed human beings yet. And I think that really should be carried on into the early 20s based on the research we have about reoffending. Now, are there also those people that need to be sent away because they just can't be around other people? Yes. But there's, again, this wide continuum, which makes the exploring the stories and the whys and the what happens so fascinating to us, I think, because it's not, cut. I just see a comment from somebody who says I raised 3 sons. I have 5 nephews, and fortunately, they're all above that magic age of young and dumb. So it's like,
yeah, it's
oh, dear
interesting.
heavens.
Yeah, I have a friend who is he testifies, he's an expert witness. He's going to probably testify in that Florida case for that kid who did the shootings. I think he's got for the defense. He is he does neurobiology and that kind of thing. And during the worst of COVID, I was asking friends for book recommendations for just anything, and he sent me some recommendations on books on neuroscience, the brain, and just like what you were talking about.
Fascinating, yeah.
And he's done this for a long time, and he's done the research for literally decades, and it's true. I mean, and it's hard sometimes to separate your emotions when you see the victims of these crimes, even though they were, perpetrated by a 15-year-old, the anguish of the victims' families and everything. You just, like, for me, my immediate reaction is, where's the nearest tree?
Yeah,
away. But
yeah,
just put them away. But there's so much more, like you were saying, Cathy, that in their brain and their brain chemistry, they are literally not fully developed. And so how do you deal with that? And that's why he testifies. His name is Larry Steinberg.
Yeah.
Do you know who he is?
I know the name.
Yeah. Larry does a lot of that kind of testimony, expert testimony, and that's why, is because he said, look, they're just not the same as you and me. They've got this whole period of time when they're, and for males, it's a combination of testosterone and brain chemistry, and these things haven't lined up yet, and they don't know what to do, with either thing. They're just this ball of, energy, and they don't. Sometimes it just goes bad, and it's tragic when it happens.
And the sociological realm in which they find themselves, just, this is what other people are doing. And I look at gun violence among young men, and my heart's just broken. I mean, it's just broken. Now, somebody who plots and plans to kill his wife so he can get the insurance money and not split his retirement with her, that kind of stuff. Away.
Yeah.
That's a whole different kind of crime to me.
Yeah.
So
I think we're going to have some questions from our viewers. If anybody has something they'd like to pipe in with.
I see stuff.
Let's see. I'm going to see if anyone's raising their hand, or feel free to just formulate a question. Or
well, if they're shy to answer any, to come up with the questions, I was going to mention, since actually someone's asking what's the best way to get started writing true crime. That sort of segue, I was going to mention about researching and getting your facts right. That's one thing you definitely want to do if you're going to start writing true crime, or if you're going to submit material that's true crime. To get started, I mean, really, look upon this, put on your nonfiction hat, your journalism, your hat, and if you have a specific case, like for instance, with my anthologies, that's a good way to get started. I mean, start smaller instead of like investing 2, 3, 4 years in some large book of, one case, which I don't even know how people can do that. I think I'd die. But
and then the ending doesn't come out the way it's supposed to.
Or something changed, the book's published, and suddenly there's some new evidence and it's shot to hell. Part 2, another book. But I mean, there's a lot of, if there's opportunities to, like I said, if you wanted to write something that's shorter, shorter piece as opposed to, a very lengthy tome, anthologies such as I do are a good place to try to, get some work out there. There's so many people who have blogs, podcasts, whatever. It's just a matter of what you're interested in doing. If you have a specific case that you want to pursue and you've got the contacts and the research skills to really get into it, it is a little easier to publish nonfiction than fiction. I mean, I will say that. The doors of fiction are really hard to beat down. And there's just seems to be a lot more opportunity in nonfiction areas. So that's something to consider.
And I would point people to History Press. They started in the UK and they're in the States, but it's a very targeted market. They're very regional. So they're all over the place, but your book would only be a very regional publication. But they do like more extended cases. The books tend to be shorter, 40, 50,000 words, and they do like to be illustrated. They do like them to be historical. So it can't be, the latest headline case that you're writing about. But they have an avid reader base and they're really good at, getting the story out there in the region where you are. So if there's a case locally that you're very fascinated by that hasn't been written about, and especially if it's, a few years past and sort of settled and that sort of thing, then dig in there. But they do want really solid research, and that's the same old stuff they taught you in the 9th grade, So, how to get in there and dig for it. And the local library is usually just a treasure trove for a local case. But Joan and I were talking beforehand, though, like if you're in Los Angeles and writing during a period of time when they had a half a dozen newspapers all warring for readers, then your research can take a while. But
it can, and it's very skewed. I mean, you can read one newspaper and it'll have a whole different take on it because they have an agenda, just like anything else, really. And it can be confusing and frustrating, and you have to somehow sort through it. And usually if I can get a consensus, I figure I'm as close to the truth as I'm going to get, because, we're, like we were talking about earlier, we write about, when you write about criminals, well, you're not going to get too much truth from them, right? They're not going to open up to you and tell, and tell you that everything they say is not going to be legit. So you have to have a way to get that information and compress it and see where, does it make sense here? Does it not make sense here? And sort of put it against other bits and pieces that you have to see if it is actually a legitimate bit of information. It's really being a detective. It's really being a detective. You have to look at the whole thing, and then you have to find the little pieces that fit and the ones that don't. And there's still, can you make a mistake? Oh yeah, you can.
No matter how much you work not to.
You can, and
That's
part of the
like
reason,
an editor like Mitzi, so she'll catch some of it.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah, that all falls on me. The worst part of the job, the fact checking.
You do a really good job.
I just want to kill myself when it's time for fact checking.
Oh no, that's got to be the worst. But I mean, for people starting out, I would say, I like writing historical true crime for a lot of reasons, and one is that you'll never run out of material. Never, ever, ever.
Yeah.
And I think most of us have this feeling like, even if we're happy in the here and now, we have this feeling like, I should have lived during the 1920s, or I should have been born in, and it's like that. So this is my time travel machine. And I get in it and I say, what was going on in the 1930s? It's really interesting to Joan, where would I have been? What would I have been seeing and hearing? And so I get in there and, really good resources are things like, I have a subscription to newspapers.com. I have a subscription to ancestries.com where I periodically, almost daily cyber stalk felons, from the newspaper report to their mugshot at San Quentin, and it's just, but you can find it. You just read those old newspapers and stories they just come at you in a flood. And there's going to be something there that really calls to you, something that either tugs at your heartstrings or something that makes you want to, see justice done, that really fires you up and says, I want to see how this ends out. I want this to come out right. And there's so much good material there. Like I said, I'll never run out. I mean, never, never. And I plan to live to 100 at least, and I'm still not.
So there you go.
Uh,
I see some
Two
I was just
questions
gonna
in
say
the
some-
chat. We have 2 questions in the chat. Do you want me to read them out loud? Okay.
Well, I was just going to refer to someone who's asked about a case that she'd like to write about, and it's sort of disappointing because someone wrote a comprehensive book.
Okay.
Let me just say this. It seems like no matter what, someone is going to cover it in a book, someone's going to cover it on a television show, a podcast. It's pretty much impossible not to get gazumped, but there are multiple books about the same cases. So I wouldn't let that put you off. But as I always advise people, when they're submitting material to me, can you find a new spin on this? Or if if some way to find something to tell the story in a different way, because if we just all gave up because someone did a book on a case, then there would be nothing left.
Well, and the case that Mary Ann's talked about here, Jerry Bledsoe is a phenomenal journalist, and it is a very comprehensive book. But like you say, is there another take on it? Because Jerry Bledsoe also wrote about a case involving a Dungeons and Dragons murder.
Oh wow!
But the guy who also wrote about the Marine who killed his wife, they both wrote a book about the same case. So even sometimes the heavy hitters in the area, come in. I would also recommend Medium. It's not a it's sort of self-published, mostly nonfiction stuff, but there's a large true crime community there. So if you're just getting started and you really polish an article and you don't see anything else that anywhere else that you think might be a market, try that out. I had written something about the Susan Smith case because it was the 25th anniversary, and that case is really important to me. And I wanted, I just posted it there just because that case that had something I wanted to say about it.
Yeah.
So I would try those things. And somebody's asked about writing about unsolved crimes. Again, I think shorter articles, or you missed Mitzi's deadline for that, but she's
in it.
Okay, is she okay?
She's actually in it.
Okay, so Pam, why are you asking this question?
No, why is she asking that?
Yeah, the traditional, sort of paperback true crime publishers won't take those that way because they have a certain format and they want it resolved. But things that are more shorter form or something online is going to be more open to that. And maybe I've now had 2 cases that I've written about in these regional books, and 2 of them have been solved. Of all the cases I've written about that should have been long gone. So,
well, I mean, just from speaking from LA, look at the Black Dahlia case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, how many people have written about that?
It's an unsolved and gotten it completely wrong. Hello.
Yeah.
But that's an unsolved homicide from 1947. Everybody and his brother's written about the case, and cases like that, people have an appetite for. So you bring yourself to it. You bring your particular point of view to it, to the telling of it. There's going to be something about it that calls to you that didn't, speak to another author in that same way. So tell it in your own way. But I mean, you could have a pretty extensive library just on articles and books on the Black Dahlia case alone. And and there are cases like that, I'm sure, for every region and every time period. You find cases like that, even though it's an unsolved, there's still something you can learn about the time. There's something you can learn about the people involved. And it's frustrating in a way because you think, I want this resolved. But in another way, it somehow adapts to people's wanting to speculate. Like everybody has, of course, like everyone else, I have an answer for the Black Dahlia. And, I'm sure you ask any 10 people and they're going to have an answer for the case, and they'll probably all be different.
Well, here in the Carolinas,
stop me. Don't let that stop you. No.
Here in the Carolinas, it's the Murdoch case. So yeah, which I think might be better if we don't really know what happened.
Well, that's the truth, because what'll happen, like especially in the Black Dahlia case. I have a friend right now, former LA Times editor and stuff. He wrote the 50th anniversary article for the Times on the case, and that's been a while now. And he's been working on a book for quite a long time, and he's working on it now. I think he's approaching a publication date.
Okay, good.
And I think that his book, because I know what kind of a researcher he is, I think his book is going to answer some questions, because when he was writing about it as a journalist, just doing the 50th anniversary, some of the people were still alive who had a connection to
Oh,
the
that'd be
case.
cool. Yeah.
And so he was able to get information I think, that other people wouldn't be able to have access to. But what I'm getting at here is that even if he can, the only thing absent maybe is DNA. Let's say he can solve this case just absent that DNA. There are going to be thousands of people who say, no way,
Oh, couldn't do that.
wrong. And so it's still gonna have that ability to go forward, and people are still going to be interested in reading about it and hearing about it. And so an unsolved case is a unique opportunity, I think, for someone.
Well, and Mary Ann's talking in this one that this was her neighbor. Incidentally, she went to the university. She was a college then where I taught. I didn't have her. She's older than I was, but I mean the fact that if you have this sort of
that personal connection
or something like that,
well, when someone has a personal connection, like, and they want to submit to my anthologies, I'm like, oh my God, that's great. Some sort of something or some way that they could put themselves into the story. It could even be just how a case may have affected them if there isn't like a direct connection. But I mean, there's just so many ways to tell a story, even if it's the same case, even if the case has been just covered to death. And like I said, in this day and age, everything's being covered to death. So it's just kind of thinking outside the box and making it yours.
And it is your voice. Like most writing, it is your voice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, join me in the history world, because believe me,
no one will sue you, right?
Well, no, luckily they're pretty much all dead. Everybody's dead. So that's a plus right there. But not only that, but there are so many, and they like I said, there are sort of markers for each era. Get into the do something about the kidnappings in the 1930s. You could start with the Lindbergh baby, which actually made law. Federal law, and also
it's not illegal to kidnap kids until then.
And local jurisdictions. I mean, there were things called the Little Lindbergh laws that actually piled on to the federal statute. So there's all these things. So that's one of the things about writing about history that I love, is because I have that stand back perspective and take a look. I can be like almost omniscient. I can look down and see, oh yeah, because I know what happened before and I know what happens after. So I've got those great bookends, and in between there are where my cases fall. So I know, what were the popular radio shows? What was what was going on in popular culture? Who was president? All these things that you can see this big world view of it. And I think to me, it'd be really difficult to write about a current case just for that reason alone, is even if you could get to speak to some of the people. I like that perspective of being able to pull back and say, whoa, I can now, when you're close up to it, you can't see the world as round. When you pull back into space, oh, there it is.
And I like that as a reader. I like that.
Well, I'll tell you, you're not going to run out of content if you want to write true crime, because crime's not going away anytime soon.
No, sadly not, unless I really get busy with my taser. In which case I'm going to make a huge dent in LA crime. Beware. I go downtown a couple times a week to volunteer with the sheriff's department in their museum. And, I run the gauntlet of, some strange characters.
And here is Joan's mugshot. They're looking for this crazy woman.
If you didn't know she has a taser by now, you'll
look, red hair. Beware. If you're downtown LA, beware. I am armed and I'm ready to use it. Yeah. Just stand aside. Don't push me in front of a bus. None of that stuff, because I am now prepared for you. I am.
Well, it was really great having you both on. I guess we've probably reached our limits, but I've been joined with Cathy Pickens and Joan Renner from the Best New True Crime Stories Partners in Crime. Elise, do you want to step in?
Sure. Let me find myself and I'll join you.
Oh, where are you?
Here
There,
I'm
so
adding
you are.
myself
I see-
there.
now
I'm
I
like,
see you.
hi. Yeah, it was really fun to hear everything. And I typed in the chat our national website and our local chapter website. So please join, and you can always reach out to me. I sent you an email if you signed up. So reach out to me with any questions. And I also enjoyed hearing about the newspapers because my parents are old school. We get like 5 newspapers and they're getting thinner. I'm just,
I know. I know.
yeah, there's not much, but it's still nice to hold it in your hands, you know?
Yes. While we still can.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Oh gosh, thank y'all so much.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hopefully you'll come back. Maybe we can make this an annual.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I keep putting out a book every 6 months, so we can always rendezvous.
Sure. And yeah, so thank you.
It was
Thank
a
you,
real
everyone.
pleasure. Thank
Thanks
you
for the
so
questions,
much.
everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Be safe and be wary. I'm out there.
Yeah, watch out for Joan and their taser.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to say, when my mom was a judge, one time there was like someone in downtown Oakland with a gun that had her on a hit list. But she just, I think, she was always very intuitive. She's like, oh, that's okay. No worries. And then it turned out later that it was actually someone who was confused because there was only 2 women judges. And he had actually appeared before the other judge and just like looked up a name of a woman judge.
They all look alike.
Yeah. Don't we? We so do.
Yeah.
We really do. I can't tell us apart.
Yeah, that's where you got to be Joan with that hair.
Oh gosh, that's
All
great.
right.
Well, thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Bye.